25 centimeters. That's the width of the gap you'd have to squeeze through 30 meters underground in absolute darkness to reach a chamber in South Africa called Dinaledi. Cavers call the passage Superman's crawl. One arm forward, one arm back, exhale, and hope your ribs fit. Now imagine doing that carrying a body, not a modern human body, something smaller-brained, older, stranger, a species that shouldn't have had the wiring for grief, for ritual, for any of it, and yet someone or something kept going back into that black hole in the earth, over and over, for a reason we still can't prove. That's mystery number 1. There are 9 more. And by the end of this video, you're going to realize the past isn't a settled story, it's a crime scene we keep reopening. Here's what ties all 10 of these together. Every single one involves us, not aliens, not lost super civilizations, just people, sometimes barely people in the case of that tiny-brained hominin, doing something so deliberate, so labor-intensive, that archaeologists 100 years from now are still going to be arguing about why. Here's the thing nobody tells you. Textbooks make prehistory sound tidy. Humans evolved, humans farmed, humans built cities. The end. But the actual data is messier than that, full of gaps, contradictions, and academic journals publicly trashing each other's papers. That mess is where the real story lives. So let's walk through it. 1. The cave nobody should have been mourning in. That rising star system in South Africa belongs to Homo naledi, a species with a brain between 450 and 610 milliliters. For comparison, that's chimpanzee territory, not human territory. In 2023, the Discovery team claimed they'd found something wild inside those chambers. Bodies arranged in what looked like dug pits, patches of soot suggesting controlled fire for light, and cross-hatched engravings carved into the limestone walls. If true, that rewrites everything, because we've always assumed you need a huge brain to bury your dead on purpose. Here's where it gets complicated. Other researchers tore the claim apart. They pointed out there was no clear evidence of an actual dug pit, that the wall markings weren't dated, and that a stone tool placed in a child's hand turned out to just be a chunk of ceiling that fell off naturally. So which is it? The birth of grief, or scientists seeing meaning in rubble? Nobody's proven it either way. 2. The temple that came before farming. Now go to southeastern Turkey around 9500 BCE. Hunter-gatherers, people who didn't even have permanent villages yet, dragged multi-ton limestone pillars into circular enclosures at a site called Göbekli Tepe. This is 6,000 years before Stonehenge. For a long time, the assumption was simple. It's a sacred temple, deliberately buried when its purpose was done. But newer excavation work is pushing back, arguing the fill inside those enclosures might just be natural slope erosion and collapsed walls, meaning this wasn't a lonely temple at all, but possibly a real settlement, complete with grinding tools for wild grain and basins that tested positive for evidence of ancient beer brewing. Feasting built this place, maybe even more than religion did. 3. The treasure that was destroyed on purpose. Jump to the Bronze Age China, a civilization called Shu, and a site called Sangsingdui. Around 1200 to 1050 BCE, someone took some of the most sophisticated bronze and gold artwork on the planet, masks, a 4-meter bronze tree, and deliberately burned it, smashed it, and buried it in pits. This is not what a random catastrophe looks like. The layering is too precise, the burning too controlled. It's ritual destruction of unbelievable wealth. And the twist here isn't about whether it was intentional, it's about why a society would torch its own greatest treasures on purpose. 4. The cousins hiding in your blood. Here's a mechanism worth actually explaining. In 2010, scientists sequenced DNA from a tiny finger bone found in Siberia's Denisova cave. It belonged to a completely unknown branch of ancient humans, the Denisovans. 9 years later, a jawbone in Tibet, sitting at over 3,000 meters altitude, got identified as Denisovan II, using protein analysis instead of DNA. The payoff is strange. Modern Tibetans carry a Denisovan gene called EPAS1 that helps their blood use oxygen efficiently at extreme altitude. A species we can barely find physically is still running in the background of living human bodies today. 5. The collapse nobody predicted. Around 1177 BCE, the entire interconnected Bronze Age world, Egypt, the Hittites, Mycenaean Greece, fell apart almost simultaneously. For decades, the story was invasion, mysterious raiders called the Sea Peoples torching everything in their path. Here's the twist: paleoclimate data, pollen, cave mineral deposits, lake sediment, point to a brutal, long-running megadrought lasting up to 300 years. Tablets from the city of Ugarit, begging for military help while crops failed, got baked into permanent clay records by the very fires that destroyed the city. It wasn't one cause, it was drought, famine, and invasion compounding on each other until the whole system buckled. 6. The code we still can't read. The Indus Valley Civilization built cities with indoor plumbing and covered drainage, better sanitation than most of the medieval world that came thousands of years later, and left behind 0 palaces, 0 royal tombs, 0 armies, just standardized bricks in an exact 4:2:1 ratio across a territory over 1 million square kilometers. And they left a script, about 400 symbols, thousands of short inscriptions. Nobody has decoded it. Some researchers argue the sign patterns statistically resemble real language. Others argue it's not language at all, just heraldic symbols for clans and trade guilds. The average inscription is 5 characters long. Try cracking a code with that little to work with. 7. The relatives we didn't just replace, we absorbed. Neanderthals vanish from the fossil record around 40,000 years ago. The old story, modern humans outcompeted them, and that was that. But genome sequencing in 2010 proved something different. Most non-African humans alive today carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. Here's the human cost. At a site called Shanidar Cave, skeletons show individuals with severe, disabling injuries who survived for years, meaning someone fed them, sheltered them, cared for them, long after they stopped being useful in a hunt. Neanderthals didn't just disappear. In a real sense, they married in. 8. The stones that survive earthquakes. At Sacsayhuaman in Peru, Inca builders fit polyhedral limestone blocks, some weighing up to 128 tons, together so precisely you can't slide paper between them. No mortar, no iron tools, no draft animals. The leading explanation is almost boring compared to the ancient astronaut theories you've probably heard. Masons used hard stone hammerstones to slowly peck and shape each joint by hand, block by block, verified through experimental archaeology at nearby quarries. And the walls were built with a deliberate inward tilt, letting the whole structure flex and resettle during earthquakes instead of collapsing. Ancient seismic engineering, built by trial and error over generations. 9. The desert as a prayer. In Peru's Nazca Desert, between 100 BCE and 600 CE, people scraped away dark oxidized stones to expose the pale clay underneath, carving hundreds of massive lines and animal shapes across 500 square kilometers. For decades, the going theory was an astronomical calendar, but most of the lines don't point at anything in the sky. Newer research connects the geoglyphs to something more desperate: ritual walking paths aligned with underground water sources, walked during droughts as an appeal for rain. This wasn't astronomy, it was people terrified of dying of thirst, turning the ground itself into a plea. 10. The hand on the wall. And finally, deep cave art. Across Europe and Asia, between 40,000 and 15,000 years ago, people crawled into total darkness to press their hands against stone and blow pigment around them, leaving a stencil. Genevieve von Petzinger cataloged 32 of the same geometric symbols recurring across caves separated by thousands of kilometers and tens of thousands of years. Here's the detail that should stop you. Shape analysis of those hand stencils suggests a significant number were made by women and children, not exclusively the male hunters we always pictured. And some hands show missing or bent fingers. Ritual, sign language, frostbite. Nobody agrees. Notice what all 10 of these have in common. Every one of them is a group of people spending enormous effort, dragging stone, crawling into darkness, burning their own wealth, walking the desert for days on something that had no immediate survival payoff. That's not irrational. That's the oldest human instinct there is. Build something bigger than the individual, because the individual doesn't get to explain itself once it's dead. We're still doing it. Every monument, every ritual, every piece of art nobody needed to make, it's the same impulse that put a body through a 25-centimeter gap in the dark. So picture it again. Someone, in a cave, in the dark, 300,000 years before any of us were born, easing themselves through a gap barely wider than their own shoulders, carrying something they weren't required to carry. We still don't know why they did it. Maybe that's the actual mystery, not the bones. Us, still down here, still trying to figure out what it means to care about something enough to crawl for it.